If there's one thing that I know about divorce, at some point in time, no matter how amicable, there's going to be some level of conflict. And that's true if you're in a solid relationship, if you're getting out of a relationship, if you're dealing with people in the workplace, or if you're dealing with people in your community, there is going to be conflict. And today I have the perfect expert to talk all about this. Robyn McTague is a conflict resolution specialist and speaker, helping individuals, couples, and teams turn tension into connection. She blends psychology, counseling, and lived experience, helping people eliminate the root causes of conflict and the patterns and the things in life around conflict that just slowly drain energy. And I'm just going to say it, suck the life right out of you. So, Robyn, I am so happy to have you talking about this very important topic.
And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, and you've been on the podcast before, and I so appreciate having people come back and talk about really specific issues. And this whole idea of conflict and what it looks like and what it does to us in life, I think is something that is really critical to talk about. So, how did you get into this space? Because I deal a lot with conflict. It's kind of my day-to-day thing, and it's not something most people wake up and go, "Gosh, I'd like to be a conflict resolution specialist."
That's for sure. Usually we avoid it, and that's the problem. For me, I grew up in a very traumatic household. So my dad was alcoholic and a rageaholic. So it was like fear because of afraid of lashing out. And then my mom was mentally ill and suicidal. So she was quiet. So I didn't learn any skills. It was the two extremes. And all I did was kind of hide in the corner and became really shy and withdrawn and didn't know how to speak for myself. And so that kind of followed me around. And I really didn't know who I was because I suppressed everything of who I was just to fit in. And I ended up in foster care. Which actually turned out to be fairly good, but I kind of moved along, went to university, which was amazing for someone who didn't even in our family first to finish high school. And then the big thing came with cancer. So I had breast cancer. And just before that, I'd been in a marriage. And even though they looked different, didn't drink, it was the same energetic, emotional pattern where I would ask, okay, something's going on. What's going on? What's wrong? And it's like, oh, no, nothing. And then there'd be the big blow up. It would build up and just explode. And so after cancer, I really had to look at my life and say, how did I get here? Do I want to continue the same way? And I was very fortunate because I had good benefits at the workplace I was at the time, and I spent a lot of time with myself and really unpacking those emotions that I'd buried for so long. And even though I had the psychology and the counseling background at that time, I didn't understand how to deal with that. And so I always wanted to know why people did what they did. And I trained in conflict resolution and all these other things because I needed to do it. And then I wanted to help others with it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for all of that you experienced. And at the same time, if you hadn't, you may have gone down a completely different path and not kind of made this sort of your focus. Because I see, without getting into anything political, I see that conflict, really nasty ways of handling conflict is becoming the norm now. And I know, full disclosure, Robyn and I are both Canadians. I live in the States. She lives in Canada. And I do know that, the level of viciousness and hostility towards other people and people who don't believe the same things as you do is to me, it's exponentially larger in both countries than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I don't know if that's just like what I see, but is that kind of what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. It's like people can't have opinions. It's this place where it's either or, right?
Yeah.
Black and white, and there's no gray area and there's no connection. We've become so disconnected from people as individuals And so we paint everyone with the same brush. So in the Enneagram world, we talk about othering people. So they're part of that group. And so we don't connect with people and say, it's we're having a conversation and seeing what you're about rather than saying, well, you're Canadian. If I was American, for example,
Right.
or live in a certain place and I don't like that, or that's your politics. And to be able to address that in a way that is, not just hiding behind. And this is the other thing with our technical world, we can hide behind. I see people posting more anonymously, for
Mm,
example, on social media. It's like if you don't have the courage to say who you are and what's important to you, it's a way to dispel the anger in different ways that we're dealing with things that because people are stressed out. So
yeah.
it's an outlet that's really unhealthy.
And when it comes to, and because I do mediations, so I do family and divorce a little bit, not as much as I used to, but I do a lot of workplace mediations and particularly EEO mediations where somebody is being discriminated or feels that they are being discriminated against for, because they're one of the protected groups, or just because they feel that they're being treated differently than other people in the workplace. And I'm finding more and more when people come in to have these conversations, there is there's no way for them to even say, I can understand your perspective. I have a different perspective, but I appreciate and I understand where you're coming from. That empathy. It's almost like if you show any kind of empathy, you've lost or you're not winning the conflict anymore. And I think that adds a lot of pressure and stress. And I think that goes back to patterns maybe learned as children. And I know you help people kind of look at those patterns. How do you see, tell me what you see when you're working with people.
Absolutely. These are patterns from childhood that they haven't addressed, and all it does is carry on. And the problem is they're unconscious, so we don't understand where they're coming from. Like it's interesting because there was a study done, and most people think they're self-aware. Like 95% of the people, only 10 to 15% are. So we don't even know ourselves.
Right.
So, how do we have that conversation when we're just on these stances, right? We talk about, as you know, positions to interests, like what interests are you coming from? What's important to you? But to get people to those lower levels of what's underneath is more and more challenging because they don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
They just want to get on to the next thing. They don't want to sit with feeling uncomfortable. So there's a lot of projection. We're putting our emotions out there. And so it's like, I'm just this wall
Yeah.
and this is who I am. And humanizing things, individualizing things is really the key to help to build that empathy and to understand we can have differences, but we see it in everything. And I agree. And I think it's even harder in the workplace. COVID changed so much
Yeah.
and we have hybrid and so we are not connected with people as much. So it's really difficult to get them to understand and hold the space. And I think it's really hard for employers now, especially to really know where to come in. Yes, we need the kind of setting it up in the workplace, and they don't really know how to kind of stop that escalation that happens.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I'm seeing a lot more is I would say really toxic work environments where conflict is encouraged and supported and even rewarded at some levels to be that that person that demands, especially once you get higher up into the management hierarchy of some of these organizations, it is really, I hate to say it, but it's the narcissists and the psychopaths that are running the place because they have no qualms about firing a whole department, or they don't care that you need a few days off to deal with your divorce, or your kid is sick, or you've got an aging parent that needs some extra care. there's no compassion left. That's what I hear a lot. And that's what I see a lot of employees complaining. And I hear the same thing in families as well, that I don't feel that there's any compassion. I don't feel there's any understanding or concern. And when you were talking about positions to interests, I was thinking for people who maybe aren't familiar with those terms, think about interest kind of as a little bit like your values. Like, what is it? What is the reason that you want the outcome you want? Not what do you want as the outcome, but what's the reason behind it? And it's surprising how often, if you can get to that, both of you in the conflict have the same interests. You're just going about it in different ways. And once you start looking at that from that, okay, we both want, say for divorce, we both want our kids not to be put in the middle of this. Once you acknowledge that that's what both of you want, a lot of the conflict kind of drifts away.
Absolutely. And we see it, politics and religion, the two things you're not going to supposed to talk about. And if we actually went deeper, it is like we want kindness, we want compassion, we want connection. We have all these human needs. And it's interesting because we have the human needs, so that keeps us the same in some ways, though we express uniquely. But it's like this idea that no, we don't. We're too different. And if we actually get to those places that are important to us, and whether it's the kids or whatever you can find to work together on, it does shift things. And again, it's like, how can you relax enough? And that's what I see in this high stress, right? We're kind of on this treadmill of I have to do more. And in the workplace, like you say, these people that are going up the ladder, it's this old way of looking at what success is
Right.
and the winning, right? And this is what's promoted in society, which is shifting. And I think this is the backlash we're getting. People want to shift it to a kinder place, and other people are just like, no, I'm digging in my heels. This has worked for me, so we need to keep it the status quo. But we know, right, there's
Yeah.
entropy. So
Yeah.
there's always change. And again, as humans, we don't like to be human. We don't want to admit it. And we don't want to admit and like change
Yeah.
without being any constant.
Yeah. And you know what I found was so funny. Now this is going back several years, and I don't remember who it was that started it, and it doesn't really matter. But one of the political parties in the states wanted to allow people to basically wipe out their student loan debt.
Mm.
There was going to be some way to do that, and I can remember just the deluge of people on social media. Well, I had to pay my social media debt. I don't, or my school debt or my student loan debt. I don't see why they should get off scot free. And I thought, what is wrong with you people? If you could give this gift to this younger generation who can't afford to buy homes. We hear all the time people can't afford to buy homes. What if they just got that wiped out, and then all of a sudden they were able to buy a home? Well, now they're going to hire plumbers. They're going to hire electricians. Like, it's like people are so narrow-minded. They're just like, nope, I didn't get that, so you can't get that either. And that's the mentality I see all the time.
Yeah, it's like hazing, right? It's like I went through this terrible thing and now you're going to go through it too. And
Yeah.
we're seeing, it's finally being called out, but it takes a lot of attention and exposure and people willing to be honest. And I think that's the other thing to me is like that real honesty with ourselves about what's important, what's going on for me and in society too, and being able to say what's important.
So I'm going to go back a little bit, Robyn. You talked about some patterns that you see that come up, and you said a lot of them are developed very early in childhood. Can you just talk a little bit about like what those patterns might look like, and how would we recognize if we're running on a conflict pattern or a thinking pattern that leads us into conflict? And if we recognize that, what can we do about it?
One of the big things is we take things personally. So what happens is we have these patterns where Like, for example, my brother would call me stupid. And so now if someone says something about I'm not smart or, this dumb woman or whatever it is, I get triggered. And I'm not consciously connecting that back to my childhood when I was called stupid. And so maybe in certain situations, I then shut down, or I might be too reactive, or I can, have some behavior, this unconscious behavior that sabotages the situation. And we see this in relationships all the time because maybe that partner reminds us of something with our parent or our sibling or a situation we were in. Maybe school wasn't as fun for some people. They were bullied. I remember being bullied. And so one of the things I did at one point was become a union rep because it was like I wanted to stand up to those bullies. So it's kind of working out some of those patterns for myself before I was really conscious of them. And so when we have that feeling, this is where we really need to connect to ourselves and our body and understand, wow, that really triggered me. I feel anger, resentment, grief, whatever it is. And people aren't aware of their emotions and they don't understand you can have more than one at a time, right? It's like this pure emotion, which isn't true, right? There's different phases that we go through. And when we did our whole course on anger, because anger and grief are the two emotions our society is so bad dealing with, people learning that you actually have a choice and have that moment where you choose how you react is like a light bulb moment for many people, especially with men. Like, how many men do we see in anger management courses because they're sent by the courts and families and stuff because they haven't addressed those things and they haven't been taught how to deal with them. But if we let the emotion come through and then spend some time with it later and figure out what's going on, and often to look at the really deeper patterns, you need someone else because we can't see it for
Yes.
ourselves.
Yeah.
And then some of the other tools I use, like a motivational map to show what drives our behavior, what's important to me. So there's a lot of different tools, but it's really that beginning is the awareness phase with anything. It's the awareness and then being able to learn that we have control over our breath. It's the only physiological thing that we have control over when we're really angry or, in some kind of state where we don't know what to do. And some of the other work I do is shadow work to bring those parts in so they can become integrated.
Right.
Because once we integrate it, then the trigger gets less and less. And each
Right.
time it happens, we see it sooner and sooner.
Yeah.
And so it's really about having that acknowledgement of who we are, what's important to us, and what are the things that happened to lead me to these reactions.
And I think that is such a gift for people who find themselves angry often, or when they get angry, they feel out of control when they're angry. And I'm not talking about somebody with a mental health condition or somebody that's using alcohol or drugs. I'm talking about I know people in my life who just, they're either okay or they're raging. Like there's really no in between. And when I say raging, I'm talking about yelling and screaming and saying things that they regret. I'm not talking about being violent to any other person. But it's easy when people are at that level where they're not making any intentional decisions. They're just reacting. It's not impossible to see how somebody stepping in front of them or somebody going to put a hand on them could respond or could cause a physical reaction. And it's on us. It's our responsibility to control our own emotions. I really believe that. Nobody makes me angry. I choose to enter into that emotion, and I choose to either control it or not control it. And I think that's where working with somebody like yourself to really get comfortable in understanding what's driving it, what's motivating me, and then how can I make changes? Because it's not that difficult once you learn the techniques to recognize your body's feeling that physiological response, and then start using the breath work and starting to engage the right areas of the brain rather than the wrong areas of the brain. And we're able to be intentional. It doesn't mean you can't get upset. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everybody, but you have to be intentional about it.
Absolutely. And, the thing is that when we bring other people in too, if you're in a relationship and you begin to understand each other and what's important to them and what those triggers are, even if it is the ultimate decision to go through divorce, you're doing it consciously. You're coming from a place where you can then work together and not continue those generational patterns that your kids are going to go through if you're
Yeah.
doing it in a conscious way. And yeah, there's just so many ways that we can do that and understand it's not personal because we're taking it as a personal affront, which it's not. So the biggest thing that I learned in conflict resolution is be curious. All behavior makes sense, and that includes you. So starting with yourself, getting curious about what's going on instead of reactive, noticing the reactive, get curious about it, and that other person because it makes sense to them. So how can I be curious to find out what's going on for them?
Yes, yes, one of those good old NLP presuppositions. All behavior makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Robyn, this has been a fantastic conversation and a fascinating one as well. And I think your last statement there was a perfect way to wind this up. If people do want to reach out and connect with you, learn more about what you do, what's the best way to do that?
You can reach me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or Robyn at alifeofchoice.ca.
Wonderful. Robyn, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all your wealth of wisdom in this area.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Spotlight on the Divorce Expert. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you'd like to leave a comment, we would love to have you do that, and Robyn and I will check them and respond to them as soon as we can.